This is Jerome Corsi, and today is Tuesday, May 16th, 2023, with thetruthcentral.com. Thank you for joining us. We have our first guest on the show today. I'm very, very pleased to have joining us Tony Shaffer. Tony is the president of Project Sentinel. He's a lieutenant colonel retired in the U.S. Army, and in 2020, Tony was a national security advisor to Donald Trump. And Tony and I have been friends for a long time. Tony, it's good to see you, and welcome to thetruthcentral.com.
Jerry, it's always an honor and pleasure to join you. I appreciate, as we always talk about, your intellectual honesty and integrity. And I've always appreciated people, even before I met you, who are more than willing to put their integrity on the line by simply telling what they believe to be true and honest. And I appreciate that about you, and I appreciate being here today with you on this.
I greatly appreciate you saying that. You share the same characteristics, and you succeed. Let's start out, Tony. One of the big stories today is the Durham report out, and as I recall, in 2017, you were predicting exactly what happened yesterday.
Yes.
So you want to explain that to listeners, please?
So early on, I think it was March 4th or 5th of 2017, I got a call from Fox News saying, hey, we need you to there's a car outside your house. Please jump in it. We need you on air because President Trump has just said that he was wiretapped. Now, the going in presumption was Trump's crazy, that he's a crazy guy, and that you need to come in and say that he's crazy. And basically on the drive-in, it was about a 25 minute drive from Springfield, Virginia into downtown DC to this Fox News studio. I started checking my sources, and they said, oh yeah, no, he was wiretapped. It was true. It's all true. And so I was able to essentially, in very rapid order, Jerry, establish what was the truth. It's like, yeah, Barack Obama was involved. Joe Biden was involved. They had a whole range of things going on. And it was about this time, and I said this on the air, as I recall, it's about this time, March of 17, Trump would have been briefed on some of the activities going on, those sensitive activities, which have been percolating up. The senior executive, and this is one of the things I was trying to get him to sit down with Trump to do, and it was never permitted, by the way, even by his own folks, to basically outline to Trump all the extraordinary authorities he has as president, these sort of things being one of them. And in this case, Barack Obama, I knew by the time I got to Fox News, and I think it was like 6:30 in the morning, that it was true. So I went on the air and shocked everybody. And basically, I was literally just talking to Ed Henry, literally before I'm coming on with you, who was the Fox News anchor on Fox and Friends. And I said, yeah, it's true. It's all true. And Ed even told me that like people were yelling in his ear to get me to shut up. And I laid it out. It's online. You can go to Mediate. And I laid it out that, yes, Trump was wiretapped. It's true. We're going to come to find that this goes all the way up to Barack Obama. This would be grounds for the first time ever to have a former sitting president indicted. People went nuts, but I laid it out, and it's out there. I can't walk away from it, good or bad. And that's what I did. And it turns out I was right. That yes, indeed, it was Trump was wiretapped. He was right. The Russia collusion narrative was a hoax. I said we would come to find it was a hoax. It was all made up. And here we are 5 years, 2 months later, Jerry, and I was right. Why, it is what it is at this point. So,
well, I was, of course, in front of the prosecutors, the Mueller prosecutors they wanted to indict me for lying, saying they thought I had a tie to Julian Assange. I didn't. I refused to take their plea deal, and they did not indict me, which is pretty remarkable. But I knew it was a hoax then, and
right.
I think the two takeaways. I'd like to see your reaction. First of all, it's clear that the Durham report is saying this Russian collusion was fabricated out of cloth from the beginning. But second, everybody's going to get away with it. There's nothing going to be done. There's no consequences.
Yeah. So on that point, I don't get it. I know that as a whistleblower, inadvertent whistleblower, I was shoved into being one. There was clear retaliation that went on for decades, still going on. I mean, and those who seek to speak the truth are targeted instantly by those who want to protect the deep state, whatever you want to call it, the Leviathan of the federal government. And those who act inappropriately or illegally, in the case of Comey, Strzok, Obama, Biden, they are protected by the system that allows them to have these dalliances into the abuse of power. I don't know how that is permissible. And to me, Jerry, we've talked about this often. This jeopardizes democracy. This is where the undermining of the process of accountability, the undermining of oversight is what actually will destroy the republic. And I said it then, I'm going to say it again now. What they did was Soviet level wrongdoing. This is Soviet level communist thuggery that needs to be examined and exposed for what it is. And I'd like to believe that even if they're not federally charged, there needs to be something done by the states. The states are now kind of waking up. They're trying to figure out creative ways to do 10th Amendment type stuff. I'm actually engaged with at least 2 states on this. People can probably guess which two states there are. But I think there needs to be some reckoning of this, because if you're not going to have the federal government hold these people accountable, then we need to come up with state level laws that can go after these people and create some level of consequence for these clearly illegal, immoral, and dangerous acts, which actually undermine the republic for what it is.
Well, I'm sure the states are not Texas and Florida, but beyond that, the point is that, again, once we politicize justice, once we take politics and make it have criminal possibilities for punishing partisan adversaries, we've lost it. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Tony? I mean, this is the most frightening thing to me about the Durham report today.
That's why I call it Soviet level wrongdoing. Absolutely. I mean, this is literally what Joe Stalin would have done to his political adversaries within the. I mean, in fact, he did do these things to the political adversaries as he was rising and seeking power. As you know, after Lenin passed and they were kind of, rudderless as a communist party looking for how to do it. This is what he did. He actually criminalized any opposition to his political reign. So, yeah, it's interesting that both Joe Stalin and Joe Biden are named Joe. Is there a parallel there? Maybe, because clearly the interest here is to institute a one-party system which allows for any opposition to be targeted by those official mechanisms of government. That's what Stalin did. And I see the same thing developing here. It's a very dangerous trend.
I agree entirely. The second story I want to cover here, Hungary is expressing that they're outraged by Ukrainian Zelensky, specifically saying he wants to blow up this vital pipeline, which connects Russia to Hungary.
Yeah.
Why don't you comment on that? I'm sure you've got extensive national security expertise. Why don't you analyze this for us?
Sure. So this is something where Zelensky has been out of control for a while. One could argue maybe from the beginning, but this in particular is very dangerous. I mean, we still don't know, although I think Cy Hirsch's reporting is very clear on this, who destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. And remember, the people who suffered the gravest consequences from that destruction was the German people. The Germans are a NATO ally. And if Cy Hirsch's story is to be believed, the United States conducted a covert action which actually damaged the German people. Think about that. Same difference here. So Zelensky is proposing military actions on the battlefield within the battle space that would literally damage Hungary, a NATO ally. And there's things going on in Hungary right now. The Hungarians are very much moving in the direction of freedom. They are becoming a very strong republic. They are literally trying their best to become a thriving 21st century nation focused on the same principles we are as the United States. And the fact that Zelensky would even threaten this indicates that he fundamentally has a death wish, if you will, because these things will create such chaos that will not permit him or Ukraine to ever become a NATO member. And secondly, I think Zelensky's comments on this indicate more than ever how the desperation of he and the Ukrainians regarding the current status of the war. They just launched this new offensive, Jerry, and it's been like, really? I could say some very inappropriate sexual innuendo here about how people would look at this, but it's kind of like, really, you started this, and it's not going well in Bakhmut. There's other places where it is, and basically, I think Zelensky pressured his folks into going on the offensive before they were militarily prepared. And I think this Hungary thing is just one more aspect of desperation coming from Zelensky.
He's also talking about even attacking into Russia. I mean, they've been
Right.
The Ukrainians have been bombing oil facilities from Russia. I mean, this is going to expand the war, I would think. Doesn't this risk escalation?
It does. And one of the and so yes, Zelensky actually proposed, apparently from credible sources reporting on this, that he wanted to quote unquote go into Russia and seize towns and hold them hostage. I just don't think that that would be wise. And to that point, I've said this. I'm not pro-Russian. I think Putin is a thug. The Russian invasions were a bad idea. I'm not for what they did. With that said, it's very clear at this point that that the Russians will not lose. And I'm not saying that because I'm pro-Russian. I'm saying it because I actually look at the numbers. And Jerry, when you look at the numbers, the Russians have the numbers. The Ukrainians will never overcome the mass of manpower, weapon systems, and technology against them. You're literally talking at least 2 orders of magnitude more resources the Russians have than the Ukrainians have. So unless you actually allow for NATO to come in as a full-fledged combatant, that is to say, you put NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine as an adversary to the Russians, there's no way Ukraine's going to win. It's a numbers game at this point. So the more that Zelensky threatens to use these extraordinary aggressive methods, the more potential there is for expansion of the conflict. We don't want that. I don't think the Russians want that. And the Russians will not lose. And yeah, I think their threats of using nuclear weapons, if the Russians are about to lose, they will use nuclear weapons. And I don't doubt that at all, because what else do they have to lose at that point if NATO's come in and they're actually being beaten back? So I do believe that the slippery slope to expanding the conflict is something we must avoid.
We're fighting essentially a war with the United States heavily funding and arming Ukraine as well as NATO.
Right.
And one of the military NATO said that basically NATO's been with Russia since 2014. I mean, it's with it demanding an act to the sea, through the Black Sea to the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. I don't see it's going to be denied. I'm not a Putin fan either, but I'm agreeing with you. And I think
so. Part of this, Jerry, is Victoria Nuland, and now by extension Tony Blinken.
Yes,
and I think they've been very dangerous. The color revolution and the issues that relate to what happened in 2013, 2014 are the roots of the current problem. I mean, this goes back longer. This goes back to the 90s when Bill Clinton and the Clinton administration convinced Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons. Simply put, Jerry, if they kept their nuclear weapons, I don't think we'd be having these problems. But with that said, the discovery of resources of gas, oil, and other fossil fuels in abundance in the Black Sea region near Ukraine and in Ukraine in the Donbass region was I think real driver of the color revolution. And the idea was to let's move Ukraine out of the sphere of the Russian influence and into the EU for purposes of having all these resources. So ultimately, it always comes down to me. Wars are mostly about resources. I think this is one of those wars where it was all about that. But Victoria Nuland, the Obama administration, clearly engaged in interfering with the internal affairs of another nation, Ukraine, and pushing out a pro-Russian government for a pro-EU government. And that's what I think really sparked the current conflict. And
well, I think you're right. The 2014 Maidan revolution, when Yanukovych, the duly elected but pro-Russian president of Ukraine, was ousted, and the State Department, Victoria Nuland, Hillary Clinton, Soros were engineering that. I mean, it was an engineered revolution, and it has really started what we're dealing with today, because Russia is not about to. I mean, idea of getting Finland and Ukraine into NATO is very confrontative to Russia.
Right.
Wouldn't you agree? Yeah.
I agree. So Finland and Russia have been at odds. I do encourage people to study history here. You know, the Finns and Russians have had territorial disputes pretty much forever. I mean, it goes back a long time. As long as those two nations have existed in some form, they've had disputes. And right before World War II in 1939, the Russians actually invaded Finland. To very poor effect, I might add, because Stalin, speaking of Stalin and wrong and Soviet level wrongdoing, had purged all of the folks in the Russian army who had any sense of true technical skill, because they may be a threat, and the Russians got their butts kicked soundly. So it's just there's been a natural conflict there going back, and then obviously Sweden and other folks have always been concerned. So I just don't believe it's going to be necessarily a good thing. Plus, the other thing, Jerry, going back to the 90s, there was a word given by the West, by NATO, saying they would not expand towards Russia once the Cold War ended, and obviously that pledge was not kept. So again, I'm not speaking pro-Russian. I'm just saying, hey, we agreed to not do this, and we did it anyway. So does that make simply saying that the United States and NATO broke their promises? I don't know. I don't think so. I'm simply stating what the agreement was and why Putin is upset about the fact that NATO has continued to expand east. And so you need to accept the fact that he's going to be upset about this. The other thing, a quick aside on this, Jerry, we, the United States, tend to project our culture onto other cultures. It's total insanity. It's like, no, you need to look at the world from their perspective so you can better understand their reactions to the things you do. And this is one of those situations where I don't know why people are surprised in our foreign policy infrastructure that the Russians have reacted badly to NATO expanding east, because they said don't do it. The Russians said don't do it. NATO said they wouldn't do it, and they did it anyway. So that underlying friction still remains between the United States, Russia, and NATO at Russia at this point. So
yeah, it's a geopolitical reality. I mean, Finland's also the access through the Baltic Sea to the Atlantic, and this is a buffer zone, sphere of influence, Eastern Europe of Russia, just like we were upset when Russia put missiles in Cuba. I mean, it's the same kind of a geopolitical reality.
Right.
Let's go to the next story because it's related. I'm also covering that there's going to be this July meeting of NATO, and the NATO members are still very split, and I think increasingly split about whether Ukraine should be a member or not. I don't think there's easy agreement on this. What do you think, Tony?
So there's not. And to the point, there were certain members of NATO which have joined are not keen on Ukraine joining, because Ukraine is not a traditional member of the West. Remember, and I've said this, and I'm going to say it again, I don't think we should be taking sides in the Ukraine-Russia war. And I've said this before. If a yeast infection was having a battle with mold, I wouldn't get in the middle of it. It's just like you guys do your own thing, and that's why I look at it. It's like, okay, the Ukrainians are cut from the same cloth, literally, as the Russians. They used to be part of the Soviet Union, so that to me is why we should be helpful. And I was all for, look, full disclosure, I was all for President Trump giving lethal aid to Ukraine. I saw that as a deterrent. It's like you arm them up, you make them something that you don't want, Putin to invade. Then that was the idea. And so Trump did that. I advised to do it. With that said, now it's time that we recognize that war is not going to benefit anybody. And it's time we take a step back. So I think other NATO nations recognize that too. The German people are not for an expansion of the war. Turkey, Erdogan, and they have grave concerns over what's going on, because they're thinking about moving into the other camp, into the Russian camp and Chinese camp, because they may think it's in their interest. So the more we antagonize the current members, such as Turkey, and then bring in other members which are natural adversaries to Russia, such as Sweden and Finland, you're going to create a circumstance where that imbalance may literally shatter the foundation of NATO. That's what I see going on here.
I think you're right.
NATO is really outlived its usefulness anyway. But if you really want to see it go down a bad path, there's if you, I don't know if you ever watched the series Better Call Saul, but there's something called Bad Choice Road that they talk about in that, and this is a bad choice road we're about to go down.
So our guest today is former retired now Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, and he is the president of Project Sentinel, and did advise Donald Trump in the 2020 campaign and into the presidency on the national security advisor. He was national security advisor to President Trump in 2020. So Tony, I want to cover one more story and then ask
Sure.
a few. I was going to ask you about Erdogan. I mean, Erdogan's on the brink of this election right now,
Right.
and Turkey is in a very pivotal place, as you pointed out, whether it's going to join Russia and China or it's going to stay with NATO. How do you see the Erdogan election going?
So he did not pull off the first round victory. It's going to go to a final vote later this month, the end of the month. But he's going to win. It's very clear that he's got the numbers. I think he was short by just a few percentage points. And it indicates that he is a strong man, no doubt. He's not always been the best friend of the United States. It was because of him that ISIS was thriving so well. We were sending weapons back in the 20, I guess it was back during the Benghazi thing, 2013, 2014. Speaking of more wrongdoing, they were moving weapons from Libya up through Turkey into Iraq to arm the precursors of ISIS. The idea was to destabilize Syria. So bad idea, as we now know. But Erdogan allowed that to happen. And then once ISIS sparked, took off and started doing all the damage it did to Iraq and Syria, it took forever for Erdogan to shut down the back door. And I talked about this extensively during the time. Erdogan's going to play whatever game Erdogan believes is going to benefit him politically and the people of Turkey secondarily. So at this point, while I think the Turkish have recognized benefit from being in the sphere of the EU and the West, they may think at this point it's time to change horses, because there's obvious mistakes being made by the United States. There's obviously things going on in NATO that he does not agree with. There's talk about him, Erdogan, and Turkey providing weapons to Russia, not Ukraine. So this is going to create a really huge rift within the context and structure of NATO. So I think he's going to win. I think he's going to try to figure out what the best deal is for him, either staying in NATO or moving forward and getting into the BRICS and that direction. At this point, I think he's going to stay with NATO as long as NATO does not allow the Ukrainians to join.
Very interesting. Let's go to the last story I want to cover. We're seeing this report now that the minerals that are being mined right today, if we're going to do this green transition, it's going to take something like 6 times the mineral output that the world is now producing,
right?
Just to get what we need for the batteries. I mean, how realistic is this green transition to net zero emissions if, in fact, we're going to have to be ramping up 6 times the mineral mining in the world?
Yeah. So let's give some facts to the audience here. First,
and Tony is a climate accredited.
Yeah, I've got a degree in environmental. I've actually got a degree in environmental studies, Wright State University, Dayton, Ohio, 1986. You guys can look it up. It's all there. First off, CO2 is a gas. It is a gas necessary for life. The great oxidation happened several billion years ago, which allowed for this exchange of gases to be that which drives green plants. It's what drives us. It allows us to have life. It's the exchange of oxygen and CO2 that allows everything to happen. So the idea that you've vilified a gas is insane. It's completely insane. Let's get that right there. And then if you consider it a pollutant, the country which most pollutes CO2 is China. I think they emit 25% of all this. But the problem is this. CO2 emissions by mankind is a fraction of a percent of a fraction of a percent. There's no net measurement which gives any credence to the idea that anything man is doing, or even CO2 is doing anything to affect climate. The sun has the most effect on climate. That's known because of something called geologic time. So I want people to be curious about this and check. So let's go back to this whole green energy thing. Jerry, the green energy movement is simply Marxism remarketed for a new generation. That's all it is. It's all about trying to seize means of control, means of production for purposes of government to be able to tell you what to do and not do. That's why they're trying to basically switch without a plan from a petroleum-based, fossil fuel-based economy. By the way, there's new evidence, Jerry, that the planet is producing, because of the mechanisms resident within the interior, more fossil fuel all the time. It's not a limited resource. We are gifted this amazing planet, which actually helps generate these hydrocarbons, which we use everywhere. So the idea of abandoning a resource, which we know to be true and effective, for an electric source, which, first off, the power grid will never accept the percentage of increase they're trying to put on it. You're literally going to regularize brownouts because of the lack of available power if you do this. Secondly, to your point, all these mines are talking, all these resources they need regarding building a green military, Jerry, tanks with batteries that airplanes which fly with batteries. All these batteries are going to require you strip mine countries the size of South Africa just to find the resources. Literally, I mean, you're going to have to find resources, mines which do not exist yet, and then when you do find those, the U.S. will never permit those to be done here because of environmental concerns. They'll tear up another country's environment, Jerry, just so we benefit. Talk about arrogance. Talk about empire. The left is completely committed to the idea that, not here, not in my backyard. You can't mine here, but we'll go to Central Africa and have kids literally killing themselves, pulling stuff out of the ground for purposes of making sure that a Tesla runs in San Diego. Think about the insanity of that. But that's what they're doing. And the idea here is they want to move the entire economy to a high percentage, at least 30% to 40% green electric energy by 2030. It is beyond insane. It is dangerous. It will literally result in, if they're successful, in benefiting China, because China's going to have to process all this stuff. It's going to result in crashes of the grid that we've never seen before. And the result is going to be ultimately our diminution of the most amazing lifestyle of the most amazing republic that's ever existed. And that's what the Democrats are trying to push right now. It's all about ending the republic, the structure of the republic, in favor of this Marxist system they want to install, this utopian system that they want to install.
Right. So the planet is not a danger from carbon dioxide. I agree with you entirely.
Jerry, it is. About, I want to make sure I get my date straight. About 1 billion years from now, the sun's probably going to expand and take out the inner planets. And yeah, Earth's going to go away. But I don't think we're going to stop the sun from going and expanding about 1 billion years from now. So yeah, I mean, it's going to happen, but just not now.
Right, exactly. And not from carbon dioxide.
And not from carbon monoxide, right.
But they're also now going after the nitrous oxide. They want to damage food production in the world. They're going after methane and farming. I mean, this is, I think, to your point about this being a Marxist agenda, I do believe that it's becoming apparent to people that the goal here is to reduce our lifestyle.
Yes.
And essentially, I mean, if you go after nitrous oxide, how many billions of people are not going to be able to eat in the world, Tony?
Well, I'm concerned about Jerry Adler being the biggest manufacturer of methane in the Congress. I mean, if you look at that guy, you can tell that he's a mess. I mean, I don't know how his people in his office deal with that methane. I'm just saying, but it's all a fiction. It's all nonsense. There's no danger to anything mankind is doing at this point. Maybe some point in the future where we actually are making so much methane. By the way, the biggest producer of methane, cows. Come on. It's not that. By the way, there's such dispersal. All these models they run, Jerry, they run them as if the gas is the only thing. They don't actually put in atmospheric conditions regarding water, other things which basically allow for the deterioration of the gas they're trying to measure. These things are watered down instantly the moment they hit the atmosphere, and yet somehow we ignore that.
Well, the climate's a nonlinear system, and it's got many, many variables. So there's all kinds of feedback mechanisms and changes. I mean, the Earth is not, just because you emit more carbon dioxide doesn't mean there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
No, and Jerry, they have acknowledged they have to because it's obvious. The polar ice sheets are growing. It's
Right.
getting colder. Now we're actually on a net cooling phase that started about 10 years ago. I mean, I'd say it, Leonard Nimoy was correct, just not as the extreme. You know, we are going to go into a net cooling phase. It's about 12,000 year cycles. People need to study geologic time to understand this. So
Right. And Milankovitch cycles, I mean, we're right now in a very circular orbit around the sun,
right,
but that's now going to go the other direction. We're going to get more elliptical,
right,
and it's going to start getting colder. And that's inevitable. It has nothing to do with carbon dioxide. It's the
exactly.
way, it's the dynamics of how the Earth goes around the sun. And these things are fundamental to climate science. What we're dealing with
Right.
is not climate science, it's ideology.
Right. It's basically they've taken the left is basically kidnapped this area of science. They've taken it and made it hostage to their political dreams and desires. That's what they've done. That's what's going on.
Well, Tony, it's been a very quick half hour, and I really want to thank you. I hope we can have you back again
Yes, sir.
and frequently. We've been with retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who is the president of Project Sentinel. In 2020, he was a national security advisor to President Trump. And this is thetruthcentral.com. Jerome Corsi. Today is Tuesday, May 16th, 2023. Please take a look at our sponsors. If you enjoy the show, we also now have the store up. You can get various gear. We have all of the cups, etc. And we thank you very much for joining us. I always say in concluding that in the end, God always wins. God will win here too. These are difficult times in the human condition. We go through difficult times. We'll get through this again with the help of God if we return to God. I've constantly encouraged people to look at 2 Chronicles 7:14. Dr. Jerome Corsi, we will be back again tomorrow. We're broadcasting with thetruthcentral.com every weekday. Thank you for joining us. God bless.